call the roll, please?
Mayor Knudsen.
Here.
District 1 Morset.
Here.
District 2 Brokaw. Here. District 3 Bernard is excused. District 4 Wyland.
Here.
District 5 O'Malley.
Here.
District 6 Burchell.
Here.
Next item is comments and suggestions from citizens present. Is there anyone here who would like to address the council on any item that is not listed on our meeting agenda for tonight? Would anyone like to address the council tonight? Next item is consent agenda items, and I'll ask the clerk to read the consent agenda.
To approve the public hearing and regular meeting minutes of August 18th, 2008. To approve claims for payment in the amount of $538,121.63. A detailed description is available in the clerk's office on request. To approve amending the City of Hudson Employee Handbook to add the following to Chapter 9, Section 5. Effective January 1st, 2009, all employees covered exclusively by this handbook, plus election officials and utility commission members, shall be required to receive compensation through direct deposit. Forms will be provided to employees to process the direct deposit of their compensation. This section shall not apply to election inspectors. Employees who are represented by collective bargaining units shall follow the direct deposit guidelines set forth in their respective agreements.
Excuse me, could I interrupt? It should read plus elected officials up on the top there, not election.
Okay. To approve the issuance of a temporary Class B retailer's license to Skits Outreach Services Incorporated to sell beer and wine at the SOS Gala fundraiser event September 16, 2008 at the Fifth Center for Arts, 109 Locust Street. To approve the issuance of a temporary Class B retailer's license to the St. Patrick's Church to sell beer and wine September 20th and 21st, 2008 at the annual Fall Fest at 1500 Vine Street. To approve the request of the Hunter Hill Condo Association to install Children at Play signage on Hunter Hill Road to be funded by the association. To approve the Park Board request to install Children at Play and 10-mile-per-hour speed limit signage in Prospect Park. To deny the request for a stop sign on Ashbury Court at the intersection of Tribute Avenue. To appoint the following people as additional election inspectors through December 31st, 2009, as recommended by the Democratic Party. Richard Schager, Linda Schultz, Jerry Blaha, Patricia Henderson, Kate Larson, and Sue Malika. That is all.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second. Roll call vote, please.
Wyland?
Yes.
O'Malley?
Yes.
Morset?
Yes.
Burchell?
Yes.
Brokaw? Yes.
Consent agenda is approved. Next item on our agenda will be applications for operators licenses.
I will recuse myself, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Morissette recuses himself. The Finance Committee recommended approval of the licenses as contained on your staff recommendation on the issue sheet.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the operators licenses. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Operators licenses are approved. Next item is number 7 on the Finance Committee agenda. Consider changing capital outlay budget for Public Works Department purchase of a reflectometer and software for federal compliance pertaining to sign reflectivity. This item came from Public Works Committee. At Finance, we recommended approval. And the funding source was to be the bond proceeds from the 2nd and Cooley Road new head replacement fund for signal lights. The purchase is to be from TAPCO in the amount of $14,500.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Do you want to hear from Tom, or are you happy with the committee work? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion carries. Next item is Wisconsin Street Walking Path Repairs and Funding. Public Works Committee reviewed this and recommended that we make the improvements to the Wisconsin Street Walking Path, and the Finance Committee recommended the expenditure of $8,750 of remaining funds from the in-house mill and overlay sidewalk curb and gutter program for 2008. This will be patching. There was also been discussion that we should look at the total reconstruction of Wisconsin Street in the near future.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on this one. Any discussion, questions?
Was there a time frame on that, or
On the Wisconsin Street or on the
the
patching?
whole Wisconsin Street?
There'll be a 5-year plan that we'll be presenting later this year.
Okay.
Other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Looks like next item is update on projects. Mr. Chuck Schwartz, city engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Crestview Drive, milling over, they started milling that today. There's still a little bit of patching work, so that'll bring traffic down to one way now for probably the next month. Down at the lakefront, we do have 3 contractors working on top of each other. The irrigation contractor is hopeful that he'll be out of there by Thursday, and by then the tree should be planted as well, which would allow Pember to get in there and to establish turf. That's the highlights. Is there any specific questions for me this evening?
Any questions for Chuck? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item under unfinished business is an update on the proposed joint library major capital project agreement. I apologize. Did you get this?
Yes.
You did get this?
Yep.
Okay. In your packet, I had a memo with some summary. To go back to our last meeting, we discussed some points of issue, items of interest within the major capital project proposal. To go back and review, we already adopted the amended joint library agreement. I haven't signed it yet, but you authorized that, and there's some final typographic changes and things that are going on, and there will be a final copy ready for signing soon. The major capital project proposal is specific to the nuclear management facility, the NMC building down on First Street. And it's something that we've been negotiating between the 4 partner municipalities, the town of St. Joe, the town of Hudson, city of Hudson, and the village of North Hudson. And our partner in this public-private partnership on this is the Hudson Area Library Foundation. As we discussed last time, we recommended that the municipalities would not bond for more than 50% of the project or a maximum of $5 million. All the municipalities are in concurrence on that. The idea to require donations or qualified commitments of at least $4 million prior to the expenditure of public dollars. I think all the municipalities are in agreement on that as well. On number 3 up here, we had asked that, and I had suggested, and I think I had your concurrence, but this is coming up again, was that the private and non-municipal funding should be raised by September of 2009. I'll talk about that some more because there's been a suggestion to change that. Number 4 was then that we provided matching funds on a $1 to $1 basis once we reached that $4 million threshold. So just to recap for you, when the private funding hits $4 million, the municipalities would then contribute the $4 million of public dollars, and we'd have $8 million to go forward with the project. The building would be purchased at that point, construction would start, fundraising would continue. And as that additional $1 million, we hope, of private fundraising comes in that takes it from the $4 million to the $5 million, then the municipalities would be on a dollar-for-dollar matching. So for example, if fundraising stopped at 4.7, then the public contribution would be 4.7. Here's where this is at, and you can see my recommendation in bold here in the third paragraph. The suggestion was made that September 2009 is not enough time for the private fundraising to succeed to that level, the $4 million level. We discussed the idea of extending that to March of 2010, and we discussed December 31st of 2009, and there are people who still think it should be September of 2009. I'm one of those who thinks that by budget time next year, we should know whether we're going forward with this project or not. That's a short timeline for the fundraising component, but otherwise we'll have to do another budget for all the municipalities without knowing where we stand on this. That's a change. It's going to be up to you, because you the council members will need to vote on this major capital project agreement where this is included. And if you've got your copies of that, it's in section 14C. To leave that item, I would just to recap for you a couple of significant changes that happened after our last meeting. We had been talking about the definition of a qualified commitment by private donors as being a pledge that would be paid over 3 years. That's now been extended to 5 years. So that changes the cash flow of the project a little bit, but I think everyone agreed that was probably okay. And to loosen up a little on what the $4 million includes, we have now discussed adding in pledges from private individuals, except that those pledges will only be counted at 95% of whatever they are. So if you pledged $1,000 as an individual to be paid over, say, 5 years at $200 a year, that would go into the calculation of have we reached $4 million as $950. 95%, and that's based on an expected uncollectible portion of some of the pledges. The major capital agreement needs to be approved by September 22nd by all the 4 municipalities. So we're all in the process of discussing it. If you have questions about it, bring them up, or you're welcome to come to our last few meetings. We'll be meeting tomorrow morning on this again, 6:30 a.m. here at City Hall. Okay. Now, there's a number of procedural steps in order to take us into the next phase on this, and I think. Have you heard enough? You want to just ask me questions, or you ready to move on? I don't want to dominate. Yes.
Question on the September 29th versus December 31st number, 2009. Yes. Is that a deal breaker? Possibly.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's difficult.
I'll make a suggestion on that
Yes.
item. December, you're correct. December 31st is simply too late. We already have our budget in, usually by the 1st of December, to the county, so that tax statements can be sent before the end of the year. And we really need to do that. We never have our budget set by the end of September. That's too early. I believe that there is a middle ground here that would suffice, and that would be a date of November 13th, which is the Friday before our second meeting of November, which is the meeting at which we usually, not always, but we usually set the final budget. And if we know by that time, by the preceding Friday, whether or not the goal has been met, we'll know what to do on that following Monday. So I think November 13th is very workable for us in terms of putting our budget together. And it takes into consideration the fact that we have an overlap here. As we are putting our budget together for 2010, the philanthropic organizations are also doing their budgets for 2010. And they may not have answers for some of their grant requests until very close to the end of the calendar year. So I think the closer we can make it to the end of the calendar year, but not inconvenience our own city operation or our own residents from getting their tax bills on time, would be the optimum way to go.
Well, I can see some merit to that. I mean, you can certainly give guidance to this. As it stands right now, we've got sort of a loose negotiation happening. There are no motions because we aren't a formal committee. But the four boards have to be able to agree on a common document, and that's not so easy to come up with. For our partners who are towns, they generally meet first week of the month. They they have a little different schedule than us. I see what you're saying about November. November would allow time for a change.
So from what you're saying, you were thinking November 1st, not November 13th?
Well, our first meeting in November is November 2nd. The second meeting will be November 16th.
Okay.
And we have not in recent past had budgets set by November 1st, by our first meeting. But by our second meeting, we are pretty much closing in and usually finalizing. So I would say that per our history, we stay with the second meeting in November for setting the budget, and we would know by that time whether or not this would be included.
If I were
Makes sense.
I don't have a crystal ball for what's going to happen on our facilities planning project with the potential public safety building. Or if I would say this, my crystal ball is a little murky on that. But I suspect we're not building a large new municipal building in the city without going to referendum. And probably the entire next year we're going to do this year's budget without that, right? Because we aren't ready for it. But probably the entire next year there's going to be staff work going on to try to get to the point of, do we need it? Can we afford it? How will we pay for it? All those kinds of things. Right? Maybe I'm wrong, but this seems to be a course that the council has kind of taken. Partly, that ship left port a while ago now.
Well, we have RFPs out.
We've got RFPs out to do part of the process, correct? And it won't be done for this year. It won't be incorporated into this year. All I'm saying is that by next, just so you're starting to think about that, by next year's budget time, we may be in a position where we've got quite a few irons in the fire. And it'd probably be nice if this one was, we knew, is this go or no?
And the earlier the better, because of all the irons that we're going to have.
So if we leave it until the absolute last possible date and then find out, and I suppose we'll find out from them on the absolute last possible date, then we'll have had to do dual staff planning the whole way, because we don't know whether it's a yes or no until, we either, you see what I'm getting at?
I see what you're getting at. The problem is with scheduling it sooner, and Randy just said as soon as possible, you're putting fairly large rocks in the path of the philanthropic organizations making their donor decisions, because they're not going to be done by September.
Right.
They're going through the same budgeting process that we go through.
At the same time, I don't want to tie the city's hands on any of the projects we're going forward because of this one project. As important as it is, I do believe there are other projects that, at least one, and that's the municipal building, that are more important at this point. I don't want this to tie up all of our going forward.
Well, what I can tell you is I'm trying to be a liaison and to be there on your behalf and to take them comments from you and to bring back so that you can be apprised of what's going on. Right now, the way it's drafted is December 31st. Unless we object to that, it's going forward with December 31st. If you've got some different date in mind, you can give me your input on that at any time. This item has been put on our agenda for exactly this purpose tonight.
I have to ask one question. What we're talking about now is what's going to happen this November, bringing in front of our voters the decision to go above and beyond the levy limits for this possibility. And so come next November, or next budgeting season, this answer's already been taken care of. There are other budgeting questions. So this is going to be when you said dual planning, this is more of a, yes, this is a delta on top of the planning, rather than reworking any budgets. It's a budget delta that either comes or goes. The additional work that we're talking about with public safety and these other things, that is going to require a tremendous amount of work. You're absolutely correct. I'm not sure that this delta is that much work from what if I'm understanding. I'm not sure that that's an issue, say, don't do it this year or don't do it in this November. I'm not quite tying those questions together.
Okay.
Because I agree with Scott. I think that December 31st is too late because we want to be looking at a budget. But if we say September, there's a number of months of them being out there and working the people they need to work that we're leaving on the table. We're not giving them the opportunity to come back to us and say, yeah, with one more month, we can make this happen or we can't make this happen. It seems like an arbitrary deadline from that standpoint.
I would agree with your point a little bit more strongly, Mr. Mayor, if it were in fact a situation where if we didn't do this project, we would then be allocating those funds for another project such as a public safety building. But we can't do that with bonded funds.
Right.
So,
Well,
it's not a question of where are we going to put the money. The only question is, are we going to have a trigger to execute the bonding, the funding or not?
sure. Well, let me try to answer both those, and hopefully I'm not being redundant, but maybe there's people in the audience that find this confusing and a little more clarification is good. If we go to this referendum, we'll be asking the voters for permission to borrow up to $5 million of public money to be available as a matching pool, but that borrowing won't happen until the public fundraising happens. So that borrowing doesn't happen until the $4 million trigger happens, and then we would do it. And then we'd borrow it, then we'd spend it. And the timing of that might be a little bit, I don't know how that'll work, but that's the concept, right? So now if you think about going to a referendum, you know, you won't be able to say to them, here's what your taxes are if you vote yes on a public safety building, and here's what your taxes are if you vote no. Now you've got a three-way variable. They may be this if the private fundraising comes through and the new library happens, which we won't know yet for a while, or they may, in other words, you've got a three-way go, right? None of the two new buildings could happen, both could happen.
Because the decision is made this year. The decision is being made this year for the levy override, and and the decision next year would be for a public safety building. So yes, you're correct. If we don't go forward with it, we may end up not raising taxes if both are approved based on what we go forward with, which would be a relief to the citizens instead of a burden.
Well,
She'd be saying, yeah, I know you told us we could go ahead and do this, but it hasn't happened, so our budget is now not going to include that.
well, okay, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think as a practical reality, either you will ask them to raise their own taxes 2 years in a row or you won't. This way you'd get, the first question would be a yes or no. Either the taxes went up for that or they didn't, and then the next year you'd come back to them.
Well, I don't think we need to throw any more murk into the crystal ball than you've already got. This is really just one question. It has to do with the library. And it doesn't need to be mucked up with another question for another year about another equally important building, which is public safety. We have one question before us. We're talking about one question to deal with the public. And remember what Curly in City Slickers said. One thing.
All right.
Let's deal with one thing.
Good. The date right now in the agreement is December 31st. It's up to the council to change that if you wish to change it. Otherwise, all the other municipalities are considering it with the December 31st date in it tonight, and they're all considering whether that's the right date. And it is not a unanimous thing, and they're looking for guidance from their boards, including you.
I will move to change the date to November 13th, 2009.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to change the date in section 14C of the MCP to November 13th, 2009. Is there any questions about what that means?
I did, but I think Al had one first.
Alan?
Yeah, you know, Lee, I don't know if I am understanding the question, but really, if the library foundation doesn't raise the money, it's a moot issue.
Correct.
So that's if you want to use the drop dead date, it's either November 13th, the end of September, or December 31st. I think my interpretation of what the mayor is saying is we don't want to murk the crystal ball with two items on that, because we may be coming with a referendum for the Public Works building. And I think if you give too much time, we're going to have a situation where we don't know when can we go to referendum. We have to be in by September.
Well, there is no general November election next time. It could be a special or spring.
Yep.
But the fact that that if there's a vote, when there's a vote this fall to increase the levy limit, you still have to have that same vote next fall, because the increase this year is only for one thing.
No.
It cannot be used for.
Resolution, yes, it can, if you say it.
That's what it's going to say.
But
you have to do it that way.
Okay, well, that's going to get into our agenda items coming, and as Alderperson O'Malley said, let's not muck it up. We've got a motion on the. Do you feel that question is germane to the current motion?
It is, because I don't believe that you can say this year we want to raise by 2% for library, and next year use it for public safety.
All right. Well, then I'll answer your question for you right now, and to do a levy limit override, there is specific language in state statute 66.0602 sub 4. And that specific language does not include what we call purpose language. In other words, it doesn't specify that you say what the purpose for it is. Now, there's only been one successful levy override in the state of Wisconsin since these levy limit laws went in, and it was in the village of Grand Chute, or the town of Grand Chute. They did it to hire firemen, and they included a purpose statement at the end of it, so the voters knew the purpose that they were asking the money for. Mm-hmm. By limiting that, you would be limiting yourself to only using that levy limit override authority that the voters give you for the purpose that you stated.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yes.
So when Devin says, yes, you could ask for more general levy limit override capability, he's right. When you say, isn't it for one purpose? You're right. You're both right. It depends how you write the question.
Well,
it's my recommendation in regard to the library that we would put a purpose statement in there that the question this November is for the purpose of operating a new library specifically at the NMC building.
I think we're in agreement.
That's
Yes, I
all
agree.
we've been discussing all along.
Yeah.
That's all we're talking about.
So that.
And that is what the last April non-binding referendum.
Correct. Correct. And so what I think what Lee was bringing up was the fact that don't you have to do a ballot question in the fall to meet the state statute? Don't you have to wait till budget time in order to do one of these levy limit, was that your question?
No, my point was is that if we, as we go through planning our public safety facility, if we believe that we cannot operate it within the current budget, we will be back asking next year to raise the levy limits. We cannot use the decision this fall to raise levy limits for the library to fund a public safety building next year. So you'll still be in this position saying, okay, here we are. We know we need this budget.
Yep.
We know we would like to build this safety building. It's going to cost this. So I was going back with Scott's comment also to say that what we're deciding here is a discussion about a library.
I think we're all in agreement that it should be specific to the library, and that if we need to come back to the voters, we come back with a completely different question. But you are correct that under the levy limit law, it's going to sunset. So for 2009, we need to go through this process, assuming that it's going to be renewed.
Right.
Maybe it won't be. Okay, that's unknowable right now. But for communities that have less new construction than 2%, they are essentially under the 2% cap. This is a pretty simple proposition. And they could write their question almost any time in the course of a year. In fact, in Grand Chute, they did. They had this on the April election, and they were already asking for 2009. And that was because they knew that they weren't going to have the growth to go over they knew where they were going to be, evidently. We don't. In fact, we just get our numbers. We just got our official numbers right now. So we get them first part of September. That's when we can construct a question. So from the first part of September until that day in November, that's our window to schedule an election to have a referendum on building a building. Mm-hmm. If you want to wait to the end of that window, you could do it. That's what the motion is right now, is to say let's go kind of to the last comfortable day.
My point is that your question isn't going to change, whether you make the decision on how you put it to the voters to talk specifically about a public safety building. That language isn't going to change whether you make that decision in September or make it November 13th. Or we can't.
The language won't change, but the explanation behind it will change. If we build this library building, it costs us about $360,000 a year. If we build a public safety building, which will be an even bigger building, you can, and we won't have our partners in on it, you can guess, without having any elaborate financial planning done, that it'll probably be in the range of more than that. Now, the voters aren't going to know, right, until we find out whether the private philanthropy comes through, whether the first $360,000 a year is actually happening. So the second 360 or 460 or whatever it ends up being, how do you decide if it's affordable until you know if the first one's happening?
Because they've committed to it and they want it to happen.
Okay.
If I could be forgiven for addressing a point that has to do with the actual question before the council, which is simply the date of the funds or the commitment to the funds. That seems to be a fairly simple proposition.
Yep.
And that is that by November 13th of next year, that will be, as you just said, the last comfortable date. And I want to keep it comfortable for us because our business is running this city before our business is building a library. At the same time, it handicaps the library foundation to say you have to give us an answer by September 20th when it's pretty knowable that all this conversation about a public safety building is all unknowable. What is knowable is that by September 20th of next year, most large philanthropics won't have their budget set for 2010. They won't be able to give the Library Foundation an answer by that date. The chances that they will be able to give them an answer, yes or no, by November 13th, far, far greater, because they will be deeper into their budgeting process just as we will be. But we will not have waited so late that it causes a problem for our own taxpayers. And I will appear tomorrow with you, give you help on that point, because December 31st is too late. Just is.
So the motion is to move it to November 13th. Pam, any questions?
No, I agree with Scott in giving the foundation an opportunity to work with the foundation. I want to make sure that we've got time to do city business also. It's my hesitancy moving the date out.
So my question is, it's September 1st or 2nd today. What about contacting those people now for the foundation for next year? I mean,
They're not making up 2010 budgets now.
I'm talking about for 2009.
The,
You know, that's my point is, you know, this has been going on for 4 months now.
But here's the thing. For some of the asks, they want to have the voter approval.
Okay.
They want to have that, they're looking at that as a contingency that it's up to us to clear,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And then after that, we've got a contingency that's up to them to reach the 4 million. And some of the asks aren't going to happen. You might wish they would have. I do wish they would have, but they aren't going to happen until there's voter approval of this. Until all the municipalities have signed up, we're committed, locked in. That's just the way that it's going to be. And so essentially, to reiterate what Scott's saying, is they want to have a crack at it for this budget cycle, and a little bit longer than a year would be good. So, you know, you go November 4th, add on a little bit of time. That way, whoever doesn't get an application this year can get an application next time. Is that pretty much it?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions, Randy?
No, Al said my concerns, and I've said it in the past.
Okay. There's a motion to suggest to our library partners that it be moved to November 13th in the MCP. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. We will do that. Under new business, we've got a series of 4 resolutions that, the reason these are before you is because rules of the Common Council call for a first reading for all resolutions. These are resolutions that must be approved by September 22nd, along with our final agreement to that major capital project for the NMC. And so there's still drafting of the language going on, but let's just talk about each of these a little. If you have questions about them, walk through them, and then we'll have them back again at our next council meeting.
Point of information.
Yes.
Catherine, would you like us to go through motions for first reading at this time?
Yes.
Okay. I will move for first reading of Resolution 15-08.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt resolution number 15-08. Are there any questions? It's pretty straightforward. Our share of bonding is reduced by 2 significant components. One is we now have $490,000 worth of library impact fees. This number of borrowing $1.5 million assumes that we'll spend all of those library impact fees. The other is that our library partners are going to reimburse us for $241,000 credit. That's also been applied here. Further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Move for first reading of Resolution 16-08.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for first reading of Resolution 16-08. This is a resolution directing publication of notice to electors. It's just routine in order to do bonding. After the council approves, there's a notice period when the public would have the right to call for a referendum. It's a bit of a moot point because we're already going to call for a referendum, but we didn't want to leave any stones unturned here. So, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Move for first reading of Resolution 17-08.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the first reading of Resolution 17-08. This is a resolution authorizing the City of Hudson to exceed the levy limit specified under Section 66.0602 of Wisconsin statutes on an ongoing basis for library costs. Now therefore be it resolved by the Common Council of the City that the City be allowed to exceed the levy limits specified in Section 66.0602 Wisconsin statutes or any successor thereto by $244,000 on an ongoing basis, which for 2009 equals 4.75%, for the purpose of paying the city's portion of the costs associated with the ongoing operation of the proposed new Hudson area joint library facility to be located at 700 First Street in Hudson, Wisconsin. Any questions about that? This is for operating costs only. As I said, our city budget impact of the project is approximately $360,000 a year, but part of that is on the debt levy. This is just our operating impact. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Move for first reading of Resolution 18-08.
Second.
We have a motion and a second toward adoption of first reading of Resolution 18-08. A resolution providing for a referendum election on the questions of approval of an initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds and authorizing the city to exceed the levy limit under Section 66.0602 of Wisconsin statutes. Catherine, question here. Oh, it's in Exhibit A. Yeah, let me... Do you all have Exhibit A? All
Yes.
exhibits?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I need to read?
The resolution, or what do you,
Do I need to read anything more with this resolution
No.
for this?
but I think discussion should be had on
Yeah, we'll have
the
discussion.
referendum question and,
Yeah. Let me, okay, so the resolution itself, 18-08, is accompanied by Exhibit A, B, and C. On Exhibit A, we've got draft referendum language for question number 1. Shall the following initial resolution be approved? And that's our bonding resolution authorizing us to borrow $1.5 million. We've included in this that it might be general obligation bonds or it might be promissory notes, because we'll decide that at a future date how to do it. Question number 2 is a resolution authorizing the city to exceed the levy limit. And there's been quite a bit of discussion about the language of the question. Within Section 66.0602 of the state statutes, there is some specific language that's called for. And in there it says, under Section 4C of that state law, the question shall be submitted as followed. And I passed this out on your table. That's essentially word for word, except that in the second to the last line where it says on an ongoing basis, the levy override law requires that you state if you're doing it for just 1 year or if you're doing it on an ongoing basis. So that's a modification. Now, that being said, there's been discussion by a number of attorneys that have been working on this of how to draft this language. My goals for this have been 2. Be straightforward with the public and don't play games to try to spin this one way or the other. Give them the straight question of what is being asked. And we've got to have good numbers. And we've been working hard on the numbers. I think we've got good numbers. With that, some suggestions have been made. In Grand Chute, they put in purpose language. We talked about that a little bit earlier. If you've got any input on that you don't want it to have purpose language, let me know. Do you have this one? This draft copy? Okay, this has been amended slightly from what is in your Exhibit A under question 2. This has been rewritten. The numbers have been changed. No, in this one the numbers haven't been changed, but the language has been changed a little bit. The issue comes to this. The statute requires that you put in how much is your allowable increase. For a lot of communities in Wisconsin, it's pretty simple. It's 2%. For ours this year, it's not that simple. We're closing our tax increment district number 4, which is our business park. And as a result of that, we have the ability to raise our levy this year by 6.08% this year, but only this year. In addition, our new construction number has come in, and at the time this was being prepared, we were using an estimated number, and we've got a final number, but without splitting hairs, let's say it's around 2.4%, 2.3 to 2.4%. So our allowable increase is the combination of those two. That's where the 8.38 number comes from. That is required by the state law that we put in there what the state levy limit law limits us to. That's what it limits us to. An increase of 8.38 might actually turn out to be 8.4 or 8.5 when the final numbers are in, but for now we're using this. And the total levy then that is calculated under the levy limit law. Okay? And then the next part is it says that we should have the total increase. Now, some of our attorneys have advised that it might be clearer if we would put in that 8% plus the 4.75%, which would be the increment of increase that's happening because of a yes vote, and the final number. What the state law requires is that we have the 8.38 and the 13%. With that, is that muddy enough for you? I'm struggling. Are you?
Well, I'm not sure that it's muddy enough that it's not very clear, because if I read this, I would say take my tax bill and multiply it by, 1.13, and that would be my new tax bill, which is inaccurate. Because my tax bill isn't going up 13%.
Correct.
And it seems to me that this language should be able to tell me your tax bill is going to go up 2% or 4%, not 13%, because that's not what is going to actually happen.
That's correct.
Why would we deviate from what Quarles has written when they do this day in and day out and our professionals at it?
Yeah.
Why would we amateurs change what they've done?
Well, that's a good question. Quarles has provided input to a municipality before. It's a municipality called Pleasant Prairie. In that, they gave them the advice to deviate from the statute. It didn't matter because the language that they wrote failed. They wrote 4 questions and they all failed. There's only been one successful override, and they took a different approach. It might be simpler to talk about what's going to happen in our partner municipalities. Let's just take a mythical nearby community that will be capped at 2%. And the library impact is going to be 7%. So the question is, should we say to the voters, state limits us to 2%, but if you vote yes, it'll be 9%. Or should we say to the voters, state caps us at 2%, but we're asking you for an additional 7%. That's the way Quarles wrote it. They didn't mention 9%. Or should we then, when we asked Quarles about this today, then they gave revised language that they thought might be even better that said, should it be 2% plus 7%, resulting in a total of 9%.
I don't know why we wouldn't do what we did the last time and said, now we know exactly your taxes will go up
But we don't
X
know
number of
what-
dollars per
We
100,000.
don't know how the money's gonna be, what our,
But if we're saying, if we got specific percentages, we have to know the details to give the specific percentages.
Well, the operating premise here partly is the statute dictates the question. We're not writing on a blank slate as we were in the advisory referendum.
Can you put the parenthesis below that says, this really means, I mean, you know, I'm wondering if there's, well, anyhow.
Okay, there will be there's, to go further, under Exhibit B, there's draft explanatory statement in effect of the vote. You have Exhibit B on the second page.
Yeah.
Draft explanatory statement in effect of vote. To tell you the truth, I don't think anybody locally has spent any time on this. This came right out of Quarles. And we can change this, Lee, and this is where you could put in there that, you know what, here's what we're doing with our budget.
Well, no. I mean, it's not, it can't be electioneering. The explanatory statement, it needs to accurately reflect what's going to happen, but I don't think it's a full explanation of what all the variables are and all the things the council has taken into consideration. Here's what we're doing with our budget. No, it can say this is what the total increase is, this is what the increase is due to the library. And even that's a little bit questionable, but I mean, last time when we did that, do you remember in the advisory referendum, we added language in the explanatory statement. Government Accountability Board questioned that, but said it's advisory, so doesn't really matter. I think you want to give your voters accurate information, and frankly, the statutory question doesn't do that for the city of Hudson.
Well, that's what Lee's saying, right? Make it
But
as clear as possible.
I think you need to include all the information required in the statutory question, so you have at least minimally complied with the statute. Then the question is, for example, you might be.
Go ahead.
Now, the statute doesn't say require, or even in the question, if you're going to read it strictly, allow a purpose statement. So that's something that you're adding. I think that would be okay, but, and then another thing you're adding or thinking about adding is this business about, we haven't really talked about this yet, the specific dollar amount. This is a levy on an ongoing basis. So the percentage amounts really are only accurate for the upcoming fiscal year. To really tell the voters what you're talking about on an ongoing basis, it was suggested you put in the specific levy amount attributable to the library operating costs if that is approved. That's the $244,000. So each time, now the statute says this is the question. Ongoing basis isn't strictly required, but you have to state that in your resolution. Purpose statement isn't strictly required. Specific dollar amount isn't, strictly speaking, in the question, but to be accurate to the voters, Quarles has recommended that that goes in. Now, my concern or issue is, do you get so many numbers in there that, you know, the voters can't absorb this and understand it as they read the question? So that's, in my view, humble opinion, that's the balancing test we're trying to meet. Comply with the statute, but still give the voters the accurate information regarding what this tax levy actually will be if it's approved.
Catherine, if I may add a point, I think it's good that we're having an open discussion on this so that people who may be hearing it for the first time get perhaps a better understanding.
Right.
I think we're probably causing some fogging over some glasses for the viewers at home as well, because they're wondering what on earth are we talking about. None of this has anything to do with Resolution 1808. Resolution 1808 is about the mechanics of holding an election. It's a notice to the electors that there's going to be an election. It's posting the polling places. It's dealing with absentee ballots. It's just the mechanics of having an election, not the referenda questions themselves.
Well, 1808 is really about the bonding. Oh, no, it has both questions in, you're right.
Yeah, and it's just simply what is the date, where are the polling places, who are the election officials, and where's the notification going to happen? This is just the housekeeping part of the entire operation. That's all the resolution's about.
Except for the fact that the exhibit to the resolution, which is part of the resolution and is the notice of referendum,
It's what will be posted at the
contains
polling
the
place.
question.
Yes.
So in approving Resolution 1808, and it's only a first reading today, you're attaching the exhibit that includes the questions, and if you do a second reading, that will be the questions that will go on the referendum. So it's important that those are discussed, and also, since it's a first reading, I think it's important that you and people out there know that there may be changes to those questions at the second reading because of the issues we're discussing.
Okay. I would call the question on the motion, which is just to have the first reading.
Question's been called. Any objection to that? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is communications and recommendations of the mayor. Did I miss one?
Proclamation regarding pedestrian safety month.
Okay, let's do that. This is a proclamation for Pedestrian Safety Month. Whereas the national traffic safety reports from the Federal Highway Administration indicate that 5,000 pedestrians are killed and 85,000 are injured each year, and whereas children and seniors are at high risk due to unsafe behaviors by both pedestrians and drivers, and whereas pedestrian safety can be enhanced by using designated crosswalks, pedestrian warning signs and signals, and use of reflective materials for nighttime visibility, and whereas drivers should remember to look for pedestrians in crosswalks and other designated crossings at all intersections when turning, and to be aware that whenever a car is stopped ahead, a pedestrian might be crossing. And whereas nighttime visibility is an important safety issue and public and school children are encouraged to carry flashlights and wear reflective materials when walking at night or early morning when it is dark. Now, therefore, I declare September 2008 as Pedestrian Safety Month in the city and call upon all citizens of Hudson to raise their awareness of safety issues, help make both driving and walking safer for everyone, especially this week of school starting as we have school children out on our streets. Any older person, communications or items for future agendas?
I'd like to caution the public to be careful starting immediately on Crestview Drive here in Hudson. We are beginning the milling before resurfacing all of Crestview and the entire length of it. And so there's going to be traffic controls in place, and please watch for signage.
Anyone else? Yes.
Just to remind everyone, on October 15th through the 18th, the Spirit of St. Croix Days in Hudson, and it should be a fun event. The Chamber's put a lot of work into this, and I'd like to invite everyone to attend it.
It's going to be a great event.
Yep.
Partially in anticipation of that event, I've asked for some increased enforcement of our sign ordinance. You'll be seeing some signage, temporary signage and things.
Danny did talk to me about that today. He said they've had relatively good cooperation. They've got to start on it, and by the end of the week, they hope to have most of it resolved. So.
Anyone else have anything?
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?